morning. Thanks to Congressman Brad Wenstrup for joining us back here on the 55 KRC Morning Show. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing great, Brad. It's always good to have you on the program. Good timing, too, because this whole Ukraine thing, I think, has got a lot of people scratching their head. It's not looking like a very strong President Obama in terms of foreign policy. Vladimir Putin seems to be doing what he wants. And I saw the polling information. Most Americans don't even care. So this recent public opinion poll found that 50% of Americans don't even believe the United States should get involved at all with Russia's, they call it a dispute with Ukraine. What's your take on this, Congressman?
Well, it's disappointing that Americans don't care because it is of vital importance to us in the world picture. You know, it's we're in the game of risk right now. We really are. And, you know, foreign policy is something that I think that has been less than adequate in the last few years, as far as how we are building and maintaining relationships around the world. You know, right now, he calls it whatever he wants to call it. It's an invasion of the Ukraine. It really is. And on behalf of Russian-speaking people, well, they're in the Ukraine. Well, let them leave. They can go back to Russia if they don't like it. But this is what it is. And you know what? We could cripple Russia right now if Russia implemented the Obama energy policy that we have in the United States. But we sanction ourselves here in this country, but we have an opportunity to really develop greater relationship with those countries around Ukraine that are so dependent on Russian energy.
And see, as you were talking, I wrote down EU problem, not a United States problem so much, but a European Union problem, because they have gotten themselves inextricably intertwined with Russia for their fuel.
Yes.
Their natural gas, the flow of oil. The European Union doesn't have its own, so it gets what, 1/3 of its energy from Russia. That's a devil's bargain they've entered into, and this is the reason why.
Well, I think there was probably some trust that Russia was a changed country. But let's face it, Putin is a former KGB agent, and he wants back what he had, whether it's in officially or just with influence. But he wants Russia to be where it once was.
Okay. But let's look at this logically. Now, they're going to have a vote in the Crimean region, right? There's two regions, Ukraine here. The whole country is Ukraine, but there's Crimea, right? Mm-hmm. The peninsula. From what I've read, they don't have any of their own resources, no energy. It's just a vacation destination for a lot of Russians. So taking off and biting off that chunk of Crimea will require Russia to maintain troops and pay for it and then support it and supply it. It's going to do more harm to Russia by way of maintaining that area than help them. I mean, they can say, hey, look, we have expanded our size and our scope, but at a significant cost to them.
Well, you know, those decisions are going to have to be made by the Ukraine themselves, but I see where you're going with that. You know, that it will be of a cost to them, but I don't think that this leader, Putin, really cares. He wants to expand his influence, and he's going to take any crack in the door that he can and run through it.
And that seems to be exactly what is going on. So what to do? And I chuckle as I ask that question because my understanding is that that Western leaders, the United States, and maybe with the help of the International Monetary Fund and some other countries, is planning on giving the Ukraine some financial support. Is that correct?
Well, what we did in the United States is this was no new money, but we got behind loan guarantees that already existed out there, but they'll be sent to the Ukraine.
Okay.
So they have the opportunity to borrow money. So this was no new money that we voted on, fortunately.
Well, but there is a bond relationship with Russia and Ukraine. Russia loaned them money, and there was a contingency in their loan. And I read this earlier because I was laughing about it. If we end up funneling money into the Ukraine, this loan contingency, which relates to the Ukraine's gross domestic product, in other words, the money going into Ukraine will impact their gross domestic product, which will ultimately contractually obligate Ukraine to give the money to Russia.
Back to the Russians.
And so we give them money under any circumstance, Brad, it's going to go to Russia. So Vladimir Putin is kicking back, got to be laughing his Russian bottom off.
Well, I don't think he will be overall. I mean, Yanukovych is out, and, you know, that starts that process. The European Union stopped the brakes or put the brakes on a Russian pipeline and for the natural gas, and you know, you just mentioned that 1/3 of their natural gas comes from there. So if they can start to diversify that and shut that down, that means a lot to the Russian industry because that's where a lot of their money comes from. Here, they have a stronghold on a lot of these countries. I mean, countries like Finland and Sweden, they're 100% dependent on Russian natural gas, and Bulgaria and a few others, and others to a lesser degree. This is where I think we can squeeze them, and also it's a great opportunity for our country to increase our energy exports.
Okay, and I understand energy exports, but by all accounts, even if we immediately freed up the right to or the ability to export gas, we immediately started building more export liquefaction terminals, it would still be many years down the road before we could impact the stranglehold Russia has on Europe. Plus, there are some that argue that by opening up our natural gas reserves to the open market in the world, that we're going to drive our own prices up.
Well, I don't know if that will specifically happen, but I would also say that there's no sense in just looking at it and not starting to take action, because if we're headed in that direction, that should be enough, or hopefully be enough. You know, our energy resources, we so often talk about in our country divine intervention, whether it's a battle we shouldn't have won or a harvest we shouldn't have had but came at the right time. You know, our energy opportunities are here at the right time. And, we need to diversify Europe's energy supply and be a part of that. The other things that we can do, Brian, is, there's a Russian youth out there. They've got talent and energy that's so suppressed by the Russian system. We have Russians that are in this country studying it. We need to open up to them, let them see a brighter day. There are things that we could be doing right now to have a greater influence and outspokenness from NATO, send delegations to Central and Eastern Europe. As much as I'm not a big UN fan, UN resolution wouldn't hurt.
But Russia's got a veto power and a lot of influence in the UN too, which makes the whole body a comic book laugh fest. I mean it's an emasculated, incapable entity. I mean, if they were going to do any good, they would have interjected themselves already. But I just don't see the UN doing anything.
Well, sometimes when there's certain things that they decide on, I'm glad they're not of note. I'm glad they can't accomplish much because their ideas aren't necessarily very good.
Well, so where is this going to end? It seems to me that Russia is going to will take over Ukraine. At least they will certainly take over the Crimean Peninsula, if not the entire country. And I would guess, given that Europe doesn't seem to have a whole, what is the European Union's collective position on this, Brad? I haven't heard a syllable uttered. Is this the fuel thing they're worried about?
Well, I think that they're making a statement by halting the pipeline projects, the Russian pipeline projects. There's two of them. And so I think that they are making a statement. But again, long term, sitting back and for us to do nothing would be a mistake. You're right that things would take time as far as the energy perspective. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't go ahead and do it, because I think that's good for everybody in the long term. But the other things that we're doing sanctions-wise, it's called the Magnitsky ban, where you bar some visas and travel and do financial bans on Russians.
Yeah.
We've been moving some military assets around to give a show of strength, some air exercises, and moving destroyers. I don't think anyone wants to go to war.
No, but I mean, and that to me is no one is going to go to war over Crimea Peninsula. No one's going to go to war over Ukraine. We're not going to step in and start bombing the Russians. What's the point of even moving military hardware around over there? I mean, it's like, come on. I mean, again, I have this vision of Putin kicking back in his lazy boy, laughing about the idea that we're even moving military assets over there.
Well, I think some of those countries in the region that are friendly to the United States appreciate having that display of power near them. I think that it has a benefit to them, at least psychologically, that we do stand with them. Let's face it, a lot of people around the country, around the world, are starting to think that America's not with them.
Well, that's true. And, candidly, Brad, maybe they should. We've been the police department for the world now for decades. We haven't been paid a dime for it, and it has depleted our national resources dramatically. I mean, this is my frustration. My libertarian-minded side always gets frustrated when we feel we need to go in and clean up somebody else's mess. As I point out before, I think Russia's going to get the short end of the stick on this. If it cuts off people's gas reserves, it is not going to make money. It needs the money. It is going to go into debt taking over this country because the country doesn't have anything to provide for Russia. It's a vacation destination. I mean, I think Russia's just shooting itself in the foot on this one. But
yeah, well, you would think that they would prefer to just have these countries continue to pay them rather than take them over.
That's true.
because that's their profit margin right there.
Exactly.
But we're not talking about someone who necessarily thinks from a business standpoint.
Well,
although he does, he also is, like I said, he's KGB, and
I
he would
know.
like to have this control.
Well, this means he's a power hungry narcissist leader like most of them. You made a good point there. Real quickly though, it's worth doubling down on. Ukraine, under Russia control, goes from a paying customer to a net consumer of Russian resources. Let them have it. I know, Brad, we're in maybe different camps on this one, but I just don't see the benefit for the United States. Open up the oil or gas resources, fine. Improve energy to Europe with U.S. resources, fine. If it's going to benefit us economically, great. But I think Russia's bitten off a little bit more than it can even reasonably chew on this one. Stick around. Brad Wenstrup's going to answer the question, what is Judiciary Week? What's going on next week? Brad, stick around. Be right back after this quick word for Santos Auto. Wonderful folks at Santos Auto. Tony Santos came to this country, started his own business, and it's been around for 33 years. It's Santos Autos. He has a great American success story. Next time you're in Santos Autos getting your either domestic or imported car repaired, take a moment to talk with Tony. He's got a wonderful story to tell, and he's got great people working with him. ASC certified folks working on your car, ongoing training, definitely. These are folks that you can actually depend on and rely on. Heck, he's had customers since he's been open, the same people. Always fair pricing, definitely always lower than the dealerships with at least the same quality of service and, of course, free loaners. Online, santosauto.com. Tell them Brian said hi when you call to get your car repaired, 761 7881. 720 at 55 KRC, the talk station. Happy Friday. Brian Thomas continuing with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Always good to have you, and tap you as a resource, Brad. I appreciate you regularly coming on the program.
My pleasure.
And I want to ask you, what is Judiciary Week? Is this the week where folks get together and decide that, yes, there is a Constitution, and, yes, Barack Obama did violate it and breach it and just did it the other day again when he got rid of the individual mandate? I had to ask you about that one real quick, Brad, because apparently now there's no longer any penalty for not getting an Obamacare-compliant policy. They've expanded the hardship exemption to something that isn't even defined now. So all you need to do is say, I had a hardship, and you're free of being penalized. That's kind of a funny development, Brad, since that was the linchpin of the whole thing and the reason the whole law went up to the Supreme Court.
Isn't it kind of interesting that as we go along with this, everything that we had been asking for the last year or two to unravel this bill, to get rid of this bill, is now being done by the president. And what's interesting is when we vote on it to do it, he says he'll veto it like he did the business mandate, but then he'll go and do it. I heard someone say the other day, what is Judge Roberts thinking right now? What has he created in this country by letting that go? And from the very get-go, Brian, I could never understand. I'm not an attorney, you know that, but I can never not understand how the Supreme Court could say, if the bill called this a penalty, how could they just on their own change it to a tax?
Well, and then the Ministry of Truth now calls it a shared responsibility payment, Brad.
Sure. Yeah.
Just keep that target moving. Well,
anyway, getting to Judiciary Week, we just wanted to bring more attention to all these things that are taking place. You mentioned that one particular change in Obamacare, and of course there have been many. And the same with the executive overreach with the National Labor Relations Board, which the court came out and said was unlawful. And then the changes in the DREAM Act, the work requirement for welfare, it just never ends. And I think last time I was on, I brought up what Trey Gowdy brought up on the floor of the House the other day. How could any member of Congress or Senate stand up and applaud when the president says, if you don't act, I'll act without you?
Yeah.
Because basically what by standing up and applauding that, you're telling your constituents, I agree, I'm irrelevant here.
Exactly.
And this is what we have. Trey Gowdy gave a very good speech on that the other day when we passed his bill that allows the House or Senate to authorize a lawsuit against the executive branch to failure to execute the laws. And it gets rid of some of the hurdles involved with that. Of course, it won't go anywhere in the Senate, but again, we're trying to bring some attention to this to the American people.
Well, one of the things I brought up earlier was, and on a kind of related point, the the White House's issue with the the CIA investigation, and Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer and Charlie Rangel and others now screaming about separation of powers because they, of course, now that they've had their laundry rifled through by the CIA in terms of the CIA tapping into the computers they were using to research this investigation into the Bush era CIA. That now that their ox is getting gored, they're screaming about separation of powers. It's kind of comical when you think about it. In the backdrop of Barack Obama just walking all over the legislative branch with his pen.
Well, there certainly is hypocrisy.
Just a touch.
All the time. So, it's amazing. This has been a different job than I expect in many ways. I'm honored to be here, and believe me, I want to be part of the process. If I'm having a tough day, I ask myself, would I rather be home watching? And I wouldn't. I am honored to be here. But, boy, it's tough some days. It really is tough.
I can imagine. And real quick before you go, Congressman Wenstrup, I just want to ask, because I am so baffled by this Malaysian airline disappearance. Our military isn't able to follow these kinds of things going on. Think about that region of the country and China and North Korea and all that. Why wouldn't we have or why don't we have, or maybe we do and no one's just bothered to look, or they're not telling us about it, some sort of surveillance going on over there that we know where all the flying objects are going to and from?
As much surveillance that takes place in this world as you're talking about, and didn't you kind of have the impression that, the airspaces around the world are pretty much covered? Somebody's looking at something all the time.
Yeah.
It's not a stealth bomber that was flying up there. So
that's a big aircraft.
Yeah, I don't know. This is baffling, and we're all watching it just out of curiosity so much, and of course on behalf of the people that are the victims. But my goodness, it really is strange because we talk about the world being so small, but suddenly it seems big.
It really does, and it is big. But I'm still. There's got to be some agency or entity out there that has this type of information. I mean, in a modern society like we have now, with all this technology and satellites, and the NSA spying on every single American in the country, I would like to hope and pray that they could follow the travels of a 777. It's a huge aircraft.
It is surprising.
Congressman,
I'm sure we'll have some theories come up on the internet soon.
Absolutely. Congressman, good talking to you, and look forward to having you again on the program real soon. Best to your wife and your baby. How's your baby doing?
He's doing great. He's here in D.C. today. I'm always glad to have him here. And makes something to look forward to at the end of the day.
We'll get him out of there quickly because it might rub off on him.
We all leave.
Congressman Wenstrup, take care, man. Have a great weekend. 7:20.